let's start right back at the beginning again. Let's start talking about our childhood experiences for a moment in terms of our image of ourselves. I said we create ourselves, didn't I? Last night and the night before I was talking about that. And that we create ourselves in response, in our responsibility, in the way, the abilities we show of responding to the conditions of our life, to all the things that hit us. And I pointed out last night that scapegoating was not a way to go, to point the finger and say, it's all their fault back there, it's my parents' fault, it's the nuns' fault in school, they gave me all these idiot attitudes and so on. That doesn't help any. It doesn't help a bit. You can scapegoat for the rest of your lives. All that says is, I'm not responsible. I do not allow clients of mine to say I can't. I don't allow them to say it's impossible. Peter walked on water for a little while until he decided he couldn't do it. And then he went glub. They get to say, I won't do it, I won't try, I don't care to, I don't want to get into that, the hell with you, Barbeau. They get to say anything that accepts responsibility, but they do not get to say, I can't. You are the most powerful person in the world when it comes to controlling what you choose to do or don't do in regard to the conditions of your life. Now, let's say though that when we're this little, when we talk about children day after tomorrow, why we'll talk about this, when we're about this little, there are these giants in the world. And they send us big messages. We talked about that. From the time we're this big, we start getting messages. Depending upon our color coding, there are different kinds of messages, you see, whether we're blue or pink babies. There we go. And we begin to get messages. And these messages tell us whether we're a worthwhile human being. Sometimes, let's say that when I'm 5, I'll make this one up. All my stories are true unless I tell you the contrary. Then if I tell you the contrary, like this one, I'm acting like the novelist I am. I'm telling you a fiction to tell you the truth. Okay? Let's say that when I'm 5, my daddy dies and my mommy puts me on her lap and she's going to educate me about this. She pats me on the head. She says, Daddy's not really dead. He's gone to heaven. That's where all the angels are. That's where God is. And it's all joyful and wonderful, and there's no pain or suffering there. It is absolutely blissful, and it's beautiful, and flowers everywhere. Wonderful place. Now, I'm sitting on her lap, and I'm thinking to myself, gee, if it's that good, I mean, it sounds better than Hawaii. How come he didn't take me along? So I say, is he coming back? Because I figured, gee, if he didn't take me, maybe he's there, you know, like the last time he went and got a job, he got a house and then came back and got us. Is he coming back? Now, Mommy wants to be truthful, so she says, no, he's not coming back. Uh-oh. So I say, Daddy's gone away to this place called heaven, which sounds pretty nice, and he didn't take me, and he's not coming back. So I say, do I get to go there? Meaning maybe he's going to send for me. Mommy figures that one out, and she says she doesn't want to scare me, see? So she says, well, when you're very old, if you've been very, very good, you'll get to go there. Ah, now I know why he didn't take me. I'm no good. Sometimes the first rejection a little kid feels is at the desertion of a parent, or the desertion through death, for example, or other desertion. Sometimes that's the first betrayal. Very often a kid will blame himself. He will not blame his parents for a divorce or a separation. If I weren't here, they'd be happy, that sort of thing. Very often that happens. Or maybe Daddy and Mommy don't separate, or there's no death. Let's say they're together, but they fight all the time. And they're fighting about sex, you see, which they can't talk about. We discussed that the first evening. And so instead what they do is they fight about me. I'm the incarnation of their sexuality, you see, and they say things like, you don't discipline enough. What do you mean? I kicked him down the stairs yesterday, you know? And they argue about me and they fight about me all the time, and I figured, gee, if I weren't here, they'd be happy. I'm the source of all the trouble in this house. I'm a mischief maker. I'm a nuisance. Mommy's always saying, you know. I had one client whose mother died when he was 12 years old, right? But up until that time, one of her favorite phrases was, you'll be the death of me yet. You'll be the death of me yet. And one day she keeled over of a heart attack, and when I got to him, he had been married for a number of years. He had the most devastated self-image you could imagine, and he had never revealed to anybody else until we dug it out of him. He'd never revealed to anybody else that what he really felt was he was responsible for killing her. When we get enough of those blows to our self-esteem, and we all have received them, I have only met one person in the world who did not receive a single, even slight blow to her self-esteem for the first 12 years of her life, and I had the unmitigated guts to marry her. The, I mean, hell, that was something, a marvel. But everybody else I've ever met has suffered, including myself, has suffered blows to their self-esteem. Now, what we do is, unless those are going to be very heavy things, you see, which will lead to self-hate, you know, low self-esteem, you see. These blows lead to low self-esteem. That can lead to self-hate. Now, self-hate is bad news because that leads to murder and it leads to suicide. Both the same sides of they're different sides of the same coin. If I kill myself, I'm trying to kill off humanity. If I kill you, I'm trying to kill myself. If I'm not going to do that, I find escape hatches very often. You see, in the more drastic cases, the first escape hatch in our society is alcohol, the drug of choice. Another one is promiscuity, an expression of my self-hate, juvenile delinquency, adult delinquency, belligerent behavior, bullying, overachievement. So they use these escape hatches, and of course all the escape hatches are antisocial. So what happens when I use the escape hatches I've just been mentioning? I get rejection. What's the rejection do? It feeds into low self-esteem, which increases the need for the escape hatch. Now, most of us don't quite go into those escape hatch things early on. What we do instead is we learn to try, since we don't have any inner self-approval, we learn to try to win the approval of everybody we're with, and that always requires a certain modification of our armor and our mask and our defensiveness from time to time. So what do? Well, I figure you're interested in sports, you see, so I talked to you about the last Super Bowl game and what you thought of the win of the 49ers, you know, and so on. And I figure you're interested in gourmet cooking, so I mentioned to you the touch of elegance catered dinner we had here with stuffed breast of chicken. They feed these crew members very well, you know. I mean, it's really nice. And then I figure you're interested in things intellectual, so I ask you how you liked reading Heidegger's Prolegomena to a Metaphysics of Death, and you know, how you compare that and his thinking with Tertium Organum by P.D. Ouspensky, you know. And I snow you, and I move on to you, and but the upshot of this is I change my mask a little bit for every person I meet, and I get pretty good at that. I get pretty good at that, see? And one day I'm walking down the main street of life, you see, bopping along there in the main street of life, wearing my general all-purpose Main Street mask, and as I reach there, I bump into you. And you are an absolute revelation to me. You're the most beautiful, good, true, exquisite, just radiating away with uniqueness. You're the most beautiful, unique human being I've ever met in my life. Now, in point of fact, each one in this room is that. The saints see everybody that way. That's why Frank of Assisi could kiss a leper, you know. He saw that leper as beautiful that way. It's okay to call him Frank. He's a member of the family. In Assisi, they called him Nutty Frank. Nutty Frank kissed another leper. If a Jesuit from Gonzaga had been around, he would have said, "You kissed a leper, Frank? Male or female, Frank?" Can't you hear it now? But for most of us, not being saints, for most of us that's a privileged intuition. And it's attached for most of us to erotic love, to romantic love, a relatively modern invention. And so our whole being goes out in ecstasy to the beloved. See? Ecstasy means, even according to the dictionary, being beside yourself. Okay, it says that in the dictionary. Being beside yourself is ecstatic, right? Ecstatic means outflowing, boom, beside yourself. Now, being beside yourself means that you're not where you should be. You're over there beside yourself. Means you're off-center. You know, you're really off-center. You know, I should be centered here, but there I am beside myself. That means I'm eccentric. Eccentric is another word for crazy. So I say I'm crazy about you. See? Actually true. Now, if she sees me the same way, you see, then we consider ourselves having fallen in love. You know, that ditch on the way to work. You know, I fell in love. You know, boom. I am. Our friends are standing around saying, "What's he seeing her?" "I don't know." "What's she seeing him?" "I don't know." "What do they see in each other?" "God only knows." Meanwhile, we focus our full attention on one another, you see. And I've had all these roadshow appearances in changing my manner in order to win approval, and I've never wanted so much approval in my life as I want your approval. And so I put on the greatest show of my life, trying to anticipate what it is you want from me and be who I think you want me to be to win your approval. And if you're doing the same, it's marvelous, because I'm paying such keen attention to you that I'm aware of the most subliminal changes of gradation of color in your face, of musculature in your jaw, of coloration of your eyes and the texture thereof. And we showed you eyes last night, didn't we? As we zapped Nick's strength here. And so I'm capable of saying to you things like, I thought that's what you were going to say. I thought you thought I was going to say it. That's why I said it. I thought you were going to phone. Yes, I thought you thought I was going to phone. That's why I phoned. Didn't want to disappoint you. And we have this wonderful rapport. It's marvelous. We just think this is fantastic. You know, and somebody comes along before we're married and talks to us about communication. He doesn't know what he's talking about, because we've got the most marvelous communication in the world. We read one another's minds. It's just wonderful. And then you say to me, hey, I love you. Let's get married. And the forepart of my brain goes off in a celebrational event. 20,000 doves fly heavenward with yay signs written right on there. Yay, you know. The Alleluia chorus is sung by 999,999 voices. But meanwhile, a little thing goes brrr in the back of my brain just above the hypothalamus. The computer whirs, a little card pops out and says, tilt, she can't love you. You're not lovable. Daddy went to heaven without you, remember? Sister told you to mouth the words, you know, always last chosen on the baseball team, boom, boom, boom. And all these old tapes come back. How on earth can she say that you are lovable, you see, and that she wants to marry you when you are not? Well, she can't be lying to me, because she's goodness, truth, and beauty. Underlying truth. They're all the same thing, by the way. Goodness, truth, and beauty. Underlying truth. She's not lying to me. She's able to say that because she doesn't know me as I really am. Now I know what I will do. I will say yes to the covenant of intimacy called matrimony, and I will never let her know me as I really am. So at the very moment of saying yes, I have put up a wall. I've said yes to intimacy, and I put up a wall to letting you know me, which is a barrier to intimacy. Now what happens? 4 months, 3 weeks, 2 days, 8 hours, and 12 minutes into the marriage, the following dialogue takes place. I can be very precise that way, because I learned a long time ago that if you pull a figure out of the air, if you get real precise, it adds credibility to what you're saying. The following dialogue takes place, usually in the bedroom. What's wrong, honey? Now, what's wrong is, of course, that you're paying attention to me the way you always were, and you're reading that I'm really uptight and I'm not terribly happy, and so on and so forth. And the reason for that is, of course, that I'm invited to and have been attending this banquet of intimacy, and I've been going through all the motions of intimacy, but I am not permitting myself to give myself away. Because if I do that, you'll know me as I really am, and you'll reject me. Now you're putting your shoulder to this little door around this box here where the real me resides, and I have to protect myself against that because I feel fearful and threatened, so I say, nothing's wrong. Now, tone of voice is very important in communication. Do you know that? So you catch a note in my tone of voice when I say nothing's wrong, but, you know, you're persistent. You say, well, I just feel something's wrong. I'm telling you, nothing's wrong. You say, well, something's wrong, honey. You're not happy. Damn it, I'm happy. Leave me alone. Then you go off to see somebody like Clayton Barbeau, or you go to see the pastor, minister. You go see your sister, whoever it is you confide in and seek counsel from. And you say, I don't know what happened to him. When we first got married, it was just wonderful because, before we got married, why, there was this wonderful ongoing dialogue. We practically read one another's minds. We lived in one another's hip pockets, etc., etc. And now he's distancing himself. He's belligerent all the time. He's angry and he's drinking and da-da-da, and he's a changed man. And now what was wrong is, of course, that at the time he said yes, he said no, out of fear. That's where fear comes in, again and again, and especially for men. Now, one of the first places one learns something about fear is in the scriptures where it says, love drives out fear. My commitment to your good and my love for me ought to be able to be enough to encourage me, to put courage in me. That's what encourage means, encourage. To put the courage into me to take the risk of moving beyond that kind of barrier. That fearfulness on the part of the human male, particularly in America, has to do with our acculturation of the American male. We have always permitted the American female to be a sissy. We've always allowed her, quote, to cry. We have allowed her to have intimate friendships, to reveal her weaknesses, because after all, she was a sissy. She was a girl, right? In other words, sissy means like your sister. Okay? That was always okay. We always gave women permission to be free, emotionally free. But the male, even to this day, we still acculturate to not be free. If a male cries, if a male expresses tender sympathies or whatever, as a young boy particularly, he is called a sissy, meaning he's like his sister. That's an awful thing to be called. There are men here who remember bayonet practice in the Army, where the roughest thing they could be called was sissy. Like a girl, in other words. Now, so we tell them that if they get kicked in the groin or something on the baseball field or football field or wherever, that they get to roll all over the place and they get to swear like mad and pound the turf, but whatever they do, they must not shed a tear, which is really hard, right? Really tough, if you've ever been in that position. We teach them to tough it out. And whatever they do, they must not show anything but aggressive, self-reliant, independent, objective behavior, because anything else shows vulnerability, quote, weakness, and therefore is not manly. Now there were, this country required for a long time rugged individualists. You know, the John Wayne types. It was settled by such men. They had to go out and chop down trees and build factories and all kinds of things, and they required a lot of guts to do that, a lot of rugged individualism for that. But right now, doesn't work very well. See? It doesn't work very well at all because we've got a group of women these days, a whole society full of women who have outgrown their men spiritually and emotionally. That may sound like a dramatic statement, but allow me to put it this way. One of the major complaints I get, and having compared notes with other therapists, one of the major complaints I continue to get is that he's only the oldest boy in the family. Again and again I get told that. Trouble with my marriage is he's only the oldest boy in the family. What do they mean by that? Well, he married a girl just like the dear old girl that married dear old dad. See? And he wants to be mothered. And she wants a man, not a big boy. What's she mean by big boy? Well, she means somebody who, in a sense, looks to her for all kinds of nurturing in terms of his ego, and at the same time proves undependable, unwilling to cooperate in terms of intimacy, does not take on parenting chores because that's feminine, doesn't help with the dishes, is not a real partner on those levels, nor on the emotional level. He hides out with football sports. That's where he has his orgasms every Monday evening. I have half a chapter devoted to that in the book. That's where I get back to my childhood again when I was this high, you see. No. So that complaint is there. Then there's the other complaint of having to take care of his tender ego all the while that he is insisting on his authority or his dominion in one way or another, or his power. Why else, for example, does a wife come in and say, I tried to go back to school. He gave verbal agreement to that when the youngest was in school himself. And he gave verbal agreement to that, but now he has started sabotaging all of my attempts to get to class. And when I persisted in spite of the sabotage attempts, you see, and arranging other transportation, or when he says, well, I can't make it home now, saying, well, you better get me a babysitter, I'm leaving for class in a half an hour, his final thing was, you better divorce me. This was after 3 months of not touching her or talking to her. You better divorce me. You don't need me anymore. The children need me. Leave the children with me and go off and do your thing now that you're liberated. Quote. That's not what she wanted. But why does he say that? Because he's so damn neurotic, he needs her to be weak in order for him to feel strong. That's not a relationship of mutual growth that we were talking about last night. You see, when we have the covenant of intimacy that we talked about, it's meant for mutual growth, for male and female together. But our acculturation process keeps turning out males who are afraid of meeting females on an equal basis as emotional equals. So what happens? You get that kind of sequence of events, or you get this sort of thing, or you get the other thing. Shut up and don't give me any of that BS, meaning, don't talk to me about emotions, because they're terrified of them, and they don't have the courage to deal with them. One after another, I get men, and I say, well, how do you feel about that? And they say, well, I think I feel. And I say, I didn't ask you what you thought, what do you feel? And they say, well, I don't feel nothing. So then I have to say, well, what's it feel like to feel nothing? What's going on in your big toe when you don't feel nothing? Is your heart beating when you don't feel nothing? Literally having to educate the American male into feeling something because he's cut himself off from his feelings so often. And that's where many wives complain, and that's where the crisis comes in. That's what often comes in here. This is not to paint women all non-neurotic, but it is to say that most often the complaint comes down to she is making demands on him on the emotional level for emotional contact and intimacy that he's refusing to deliver on. And that's very often the divorce crisis. And why does he refuse? He's afraid. He's afraid of other things like rejection. He's afraid that if he says that he doesn't feel real happy about where he is, or real strong, or that he has periods of weakness, or that he feels, fearful of dying or something, that will be unmanly. So, he closes off. If we are to create healthy male-female relationships, we have first of all to understand and define what we mean by that process of growth, the relational marriage. I'd like to give you a quick understanding of that. You see, 100 years ago, marriage was basically stressed as a contract. Contractual marriages were the marriages in which the farmer who was working a 7-day week, 24 hours a day, or 14 hours a day, from dawn to sundown anyway, you see, needed a wife. He had to have one, just had to have one, so that she could put up the preserves and all that other stuff, right? In order that they would survive the winter. Had to have one of them gadgets called a wife. And she could bake the bread, she could fix up his lunches, she could clobber the milk, do all that sort of thing. Get in the eggs from get things down into the cellar so they could survive the winter. Now, a woman literally needed a husband. She had to have one, spelled capital G, capital P, good provider. If she didn't find one of them dang things, she might starve. That was unless she became a school teacher in the public schools, but she had to vow celibacy if she was going to do that. You didn't know that. Until 1935, 1,500 school districts in this country required celibacy on the part of female teachers. They also could not wear makeup. They could not date, and they had to attend Sunday school. I have one of those contracts at home. I didn't bring it along. But the contractual relationship, the quid pro quo as the lawyers called it, where we could talk about marital duties and all. You're going to do this and I'm going to do that. And that's how we survived, baby. That sort of marriage was the status quo for most of your grandparents and for some of your parents. Now, nothing changes overnight, but as of 1928, 85% of the people in this country were on farms, so that still held pretty true. But nothing changes overnight, and we went through a phase where people discovered another reason for marrying during the 30s and 40s, and that was cohabitation, because it was no longer an economic necessity all the way around, because we were now moving to the cities. So we had all kinds of movies in which we meet at the wrestling matches, or we meet at the Picasso exhibit. And because we both like the same thing, wrestling or Picasso or whatever, well, two can live as cheaply as one, and if we're going to live together, we may as well get married, you see, because they got to do that if you're going to live together and we share the same interest out here. So, in order to cohabit, we got married. This was the period of high school sweethearts and the movies with, you meet somebody at one of these places. Now, of course, these are the marriages that are coming apart at 30 and 40 years of marriage. And the reason is because you went to the wrestling matches only to meet a man. So you weren't really interested in that ulterior motive. We didn't share the same outside interest. Or I went to the Picasso exhibit because I heard there were pretty girls there, see? Or maybe you just got allergic to wrestler's sweat. I don't know. And what happens is, but by the time we learned that about one another, we already had Junior or Jane. Now we had another shared interest. And so we could relate as parents to Junior or Jane, but we did not relate as husband and wife. And we're left facing one another. And these are the very people who say, I don't know what I'm going to do with him underfoot all day, home, retired and so on. Or, well, it's coming unglued. I meet that kind of marriage too. And we have to introduce them to one another. Now, there's another thing that's going on. That didn't last long because, as you know, our senior citizens no longer feel it's necessary to get married in order to cohabit. I did say senior citizens. because they have an economic motive for staying unmarried very often. If she's a widow, she'll lose her widow's benefits if she gets married. So in order to stay economically secure, they don't marry. You know, a lot of those people. See? So the senior citizens then today don't necessarily get married. They cohabit without banns of matrimony, so people no longer feel it's necessary to get married to cohabit. But what's happening when people see this going by the board or this is they talk about the demise of marriage, etc. That's not true. We're in the best renaissance that we've ever had in the history of marriage in terms of understanding what marriage is really all about. And that is, we've moved into an understanding that there's only one reason for getting married. It has nothing to do with economics. It has nothing to do with shared interests out there somewhere. It has to do with you. It has to do with the other person. That relational approach to marriage is what's come to the fore today, the relational approach, huh? Now, every marriage is still a contract. It's a yes said to something. It's a yes said to commit to not only committing matrimony, but to creating that lovely work of art we call a marriage, a lifelong task, that lifelong labor of love. It also normally involves cohabitation. But years ago, great-great-granddaddy did not sit across the table from great-great-grandma and say, honey, we're not rapping on the same wavelength these days. I don't think our relationship is fulfilling me. He didn't say that because he was too damn pooped out at the end of a day's labor. They didn't have time to worry about that. They were too busy worrying about maintenance and survival chores. But they were related, and sometimes they were even in love, huh? They were even loving. And they did cohabit, huh? But today this has come to the fore, and that requires a high level of communication. And the first barrier to it is that fear of you're going to reject me if I tell you about who I really am. But how on earth are we each going to grow up if I don't tell you who I am? And one of the delights of my work is that very often, whether people have been married 18 months or 18 years or 28 years, is I have the wonderful delight of introducing them to one another because they've been playing games. He's been trying to be real He-Man, and she's been trying to be perfect housewife, and both of them have not been themselves with one another. And that's how they got into trouble. But let me carry this a little bit further. In regard to this whole matter of the relational thing, you take the situation, you see, of talking last night, when I was talking about time. Time comes into play again. You get the situation of the husband and wife who come in. She comes in and she says, he doesn't love me, he loves golf. He spends all his time at that golf course. He's over there every day of the week. He's retired, right? She says, he's over there morning, noon, and night. Even when it's raining, he's at the golf course. He loves golf more than he loves me. He's down at that golf course at the lodge. He plays cards when it's raining. He bets on golf games across the country. He's on the phone all the time talking about it. He just loves golf more than he loves me. And I looked over at him and I said, is that true? He said, yep. Now, she was quite correct, you see. Where he was putting his time was where he was putting his life. And where you put your life is where you're putting your love. Okay? Now, what happened? He turned to her and he said, but honey, you got to admit, I love you more than I love baseball. I said that the masculine-feminine relationship, particularly in the commitment of marriage, is a matter of mutual growth. Now, there's an interesting thing about this, and that is an awful lot of people dealing with life only seem to grow through crises. They use what I call the stair-step approach to growing up. They go along on a plateau for a while. They go along on this plateau for a while, and some crises, death of a parent, death of a friend, maybe in high school, you name it, blows them into a new level of awareness and teaches them something new about reality and themselves and the world and opens up a new dimension for them. So then they go on that plateau for a while, and then they have another crisis, whatever that might be, blows them into a new level of awareness. Then they cruise along for a while this way, and then another one, and so on. Growth by crises is an awful painful way to grow, whether it's a divorce crisis, whether it's the crises of departure from parents, whether it's the crises of a death in the family, whether it's the crises of being stricken by an illness oneself and having to confront that, whatever. Growth through crises is a painful way to go because it is, as I say, it requires each time an awful lot of pain. These are growing pain situations, but they are pretty painful. Now, when you have a process, on the other hand, of a relationship or an attitude to life that says, hey, I am constantly on the path of trying to grow more mature as a human being. And when I get married, I have married and gotten into this covenant of intimacy, and that means that my whole process in creating a marriage is involved in a commitment to constantly be at work helping you to be all that you can be. And that in that process, through loving you, that is, and encouraging you, and through that process, I am going to also develop my potentialities. Then what happens is I am on a continual path of growth. It has its plateaus here and there where I'm integrating experience, but it's not the one of constant crises. In point of fact, as crises arise, they simply get integrated into the growth process, and this, of course, is a continuous line, without the dynamite always coming along. I'm not that surprised and have to be blown into new awareness, because every day is full of new awareness. So that if you want to go get a job and you're my spouse, I say, that's wonderful, you see? Now, isn't that interesting that in a lot of situations, men are threatened if their wives get jobs? Because why? They identify, and we're back to masculine, feminine things, they identify their potency with their earning power. And that's why some men are emasculated in our society in the last few months. Where the new economic situation has thrown them out of jobs, they feel emasculated because they identify only with their earning potency, their earning power. And they really resent that, and then they tear themselves up. Instead of, for example, in the situations we have more and more of around the country as I travel, where the wife's job continues, and he's lost his. He got laid off at the plant, but she's still a secretary somewhere, and then he resents the blazes out of that. Instead of saying, hooray, I get to develop, I get to develop new aspects of my being. I get to stay home and be a house husband and learn how to cook. Wonderful, you see. Then he'll get to protest after he's scrubbed floors, done the dishes, and all the rest. And late in the evening when she wants to make love, he'll say, tonight, after all my work, he'll develop a new side of his being. Jung talked about every one of us, if we're going to be total human beings, developing both aspects of our character, the animu and the animus, the anima and the animus. And the male and the female principle in all of us, male and female, he created them. Do you know that for the first 8 months of, for the first 8 weeks of our life in the womb, we are both sexes? It's only in the 9th week that certain external organs begin to develop under certain stimulation of certain hormones. It's only as time goes on that's why we can have transsexuals. That's why we can do operations and change sexes. The basic underlying musculature is the same. That development in the 8th week into the sex beings that we are, which we covered somewhat in the first session. Sometimes, because of our acculturation, we begin to lose track of where we are in terms of ourselves. It would be a wonderful thing for the unemployed male to begin to learn something about what goes on in a home, and to actually look upon the labor of love of learning how to create a family from the other end of the spectrum. It's a marvelous creative experience. You know, when my wife first died, I had to rearrange my schedule so that I could muck about in the kitchen. Because mucking about in the kitchen for a single parent is especially vital. It is called creating family. It is one of the most crucial times of the day for me, is when that client in the afternoon leaves and I go down and start fixing dinner, and can talk to the kids who are coming home from school and from work and all the rest, and say, do you mind setting a table? And meanwhile hear all of Jennifer's recountal of the world outside and all the rest. And that's a most important family creative time, see, which Myra used to always enjoy, because I'd be working somewhere, you see. And then sitting down at the family dinner. Very, very important. I wouldn't give that up for anything. And I could hire a cook if I wanted to. I did that for a month because of my schedule, but then as soon as I could, I got back, I did the other. And I wouldn't give it up for anything, because that's where it's created. That's where family goes on. And many men miss that. Now, back at the fort, the male-female condition here. One of the things that is happening in our time is that I think that the best clue most males can have in their relationships, those present particularly, and any who are watching this on film later, is when your wife says, you never talk to me, she really means, I feel really cut off. You're missing something there, and you might take that for a clue. or you don't pay any attention to me. That's a clue. Now, the husband who rejects that is talking from weakness. The husband who is angry, as I said last night, is talking from weakness. I don't know what else I can tell such men other than that, the loving gesture is to lay down that armor. The wives, the crowbar might come in handy. The crowbar of divorce is used, the crowbar of separation. Very often that crisis is the one that blows him into a new orbit, unfortunately. That's the only way he wants to grow. But some men will listen to the gentle hints, you see, of the thrown frying pan or the smashed TV set. Some men will actually get the message. But I think that Kathy's remark that the best thing one can do is invite by one's own example. Well, that scares the blazes out of some men too, because they don't know how to handle intimacy. You see, one of the problems with sex in the male society is that it is seen too often as genitally oriented. There are men who are more willing to have a one-night stand somewhere because that's not intimate. They're quite willing to go and have short affairs here, there, and elsewhere because they never have to get intimate. They're afraid of intimacy. The fear of intimacy is probably one of the great challenges for American men at this time. And yet it's also the thing that's going to, when they overcome it, be one of the great adventures. Because it is so glorious to live in love. And loving is so danged easy. That's what I mean when I say that really, basically, loving comes down to being simple. It comes down to a matter of my welcoming change. There's a card over here I do want to read to you. I almost forgot it. It says, what do you do? It says, what happens to the person whose real self finally emerges and is revealed to his or her spouse? And how do you deal then with the comment, you're not the man I married, or you're not the woman I married? I'd say, thank God. Of course not. 20 years from now, I hope not to be the man I am right now, I hope to be a much better one. I may even get grown up by then. If we are in a process of growing, then every day we better be different and new and constantly renewing and learning new things and having more energy and more life and more vitality. That's what it's supposed to be about when we talk about growing up. And the reason one stays married is not necessarily the reason one got married. So that's why I say thank God when somebody says, you're not the man I married. I would hope not. I used to say publicly, you know something? I never learned anything from my successes. I only learned from my failures. See? I only learned from my failures. When I try to walk through that wall and discover there's not a door there, then I learn from that. I don't try to walk through it again. I used to say that all the time until one day Myra heard me say it. And Myra said, that's baloney. I said, oh? She said, you succeeded in marrying me and you learned a hell of a lot. I thought that over and I said, yeah, that's true. That's true. As I keep telling you, paying attention to somebody is a sign of love. Most of those cards from wives, interestingly enough, the men don't write that many of them, do they? Might disclose something. Most of those cards say that the other is not paying attention. And to pay attention is to lay down your life for a few minutes that somebody else gets to live more abundantly in your presence. To really be there for that other person, even if you can't help them or even if, whatever. Just paying attention. And once again, you've paid me the tribute of a marvelous degree of attention, laid down an enormous quantity of lifetime, and I hope we've redeemed it. Not only with a little bit of laughter, but also with some insight. And I thank you very much for the great love you've shown me.